The year is 2001. The wrestling war is over. At least, that's what everybody thought. WCW was supposed to die. Vince McMahon bought the company. Nitro was canceled. The competition was gone. But in this timeline, Shane McMahon changes everything. Instead of folding WCW into the WWF machine, Shane convinces the network executives to keep WCW alive as its own brand. Not as a side project. Not as a developmental system. A real competitor. Thursday nights become the new battlefield. Raw remains the sports entertainment empire built by Vince McMahon. Larger than life. Character-driven mainstream spectacle. But WCW Nitro becomes something completely different. Edgier. Faster. More athletic. More dangerous. The production is modernized with WWF resources, but the soul of WCW survives, and Shane McMahon becomes the face of the rebellion. WCW isn't the past, it's the future. Year one becomes survival. Booker T stands as the loyal WCW World Champion, while veterans like DDP, Lance Storm, Mike Awesome, Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, and Shane Helms try to rebuild the brand from the ashes. But Shane knows nostalgia alone won't save WCW. He needs headlines. He needs stars. So the first major shockwave hits the industry. Chris Jericho defects from WWF and returns to WCW, claiming he came back to save the company Vince tried to kill. Christian and Test follow shortly after, chasing opportunities WWF would never give them. Suddenly, WCW isn't dead anymore, it's recruiting. And the locker room becomes a battlefield. WCW originals resent the newcomers. The defectors think they're bigger stars. Everybody fights for television time. Meanwhile, Shane quietly prepares for the next phase, because he knows something bigger is coming. The AOL Time Warner contracts. Goldberg, Sting, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Steiner. The names WWF couldn't immediately afford to buy out. The entire wrestling world waits for the clock to expire. Then 2002 changes everything. The contracts expire. Free agency explodes. And Shane McMahon wins the war. The NWO returns home to WCW. Ric Flair comes back. The legends reclaim their territory. But at the same time, another revolution begins. Ohio Valley Wrestling produces a legendary class of rookies. Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, Batista, John Cena. Instead of being fed slowly into the mid-card, they become franchise investments. The first official wrestling draft changes the industry forever. Vince drafts Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton to Raw. Shane drafts Batista and John Cena to Nitro. And everything shifts. Cena arrives in WCW with his Doctor of Thugonomics persona and instantly feels different from the polished WWF machine. He fits WCW's identity perfectly. Gritty, unpredictable, anti-establishment. At the same time, WCW restores its legendary pay-per-view legacy. Super Brawl, Great American Bash, Halloween Havoc, Starrcade. The company finally feels alive again. But then comes 2003, the Goldberg saga. Goldberg finally signs with WCW and immediately becomes the company's biggest attraction. He destroys everybody in his path. But backstage, problems emerge. Shane wants Goldberg to eventually elevate Batista and the next generation. Goldberg refuses. Creative fights erupt. Contract disputes grow louder. Locker room morale fractures. Goldberg dominates for 6 months before finally dropping the title to Chris Jericho in a shocking moment that splits the fan base. At the same time, WCW introduces another revolutionary concept, the annual trade deadline. To keep competition fresh, Raw and WCW begin trading talent after Starrcade every year. The first blockbuster deal changes WCW forever. Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit are traded to Nitro. Scott Steiner and Christian head to Raw. Suddenly, WCW's upper mid-card becomes the most critically acclaimed wrestling product in North America. And the Cruiserweights steal the spotlight. Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, Chavo Guerrero. Their matches begin main eventing Nitro regularly. Fast-paced wrestling evolves years before the real-world industry catches up. By 2004, WCW no longer lives in WWF's shadow. It builds its own identity entirely. Shane aggressively scouts the independent wrestling scene before companies like TNA and Ring of Honor can fully explode. AJ Styles signs with WCW, and the industry changes overnight. Styles immediately enters the Cruiserweight division alongside Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero, delivering matches that redefine what American wrestling can look like. The style becomes faster, cleaner, more athletic. This isn't sports entertainment anymore. This is professional wrestling reborn. And then comes Starrcade 2004. John Cena defeats Booker T to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. The experiment is over. Cena is no longer a prospect. He is Shane McMahon's franchise player. WCW now has its own icon. By 2005, the Cold War reaches its peak. Raw and Nitro are both massively profitable. But now the differences are undeniable. Raw is drama. WCW is competition. Raw is spectacle. WCW is athletic warfare. Then Batista turns on John Cena. The unstoppable enforcer Shane built inside WCW wants the throne for himself. Cena vs. Batista headlines, Great American Bash 2005, and breaks ratings records. But behind the scenes, another war is brewing. Vince McMahon grows furious as WCW merchandise numbers begin rivaling Raw, especially Cena, especially the Cruiserweights. Vince attempts to leverage corporate power to pull talent away from Nitro. Shane refuses. The tension becomes personal. 5 years after purchasing WCW, the rivalry reaches its final stage. Survivor Series 2005. For the first time since 2001, the brands collide. WCW champion John Cena vs. WWF champion Batista. Not an invasion, not a burial. A true interpromotional super fight. The match represents everything this alternate wrestling world became. Competition created innovation. Innovation created stars. And the fans won. In this timeline, the Monday Night Wars never ended. They evolved. And wrestling entered its greatest era. Survivor Series 2005 changes wrestling forever. Not because one company wins, but because both companies survive. The pay-per-view becomes the highest-selling wrestling event in North American history, outside of WrestleMania. Critics call it the greatest business gamble Vince McMahon ever allowed to happen. And for the first time in years, fans genuinely don't know which brand is bigger anymore. WCW Nitro is no longer the underdog. It's a machine. Thursday nights become appointment television for hardcore wrestling fans, while Raw dominates mainstream entertainment culture. The industry effectively splits into two audiences under one umbrella, and the competition forces everybody to evolve. 2006 becomes the year of escalation. Shane doubles down on the independent movement. CM Punk signs with WCW. Samoa Joe arrives shortly after. Bryan Danielson becomes the company's most sought-after free agent. While Raw continues building global superstars, WCW becomes the destination for elite in-ring performers. The wrestling internet explodes. Debates rage constantly. Is Raw more entertaining? Is WCW putting on better matches? Who actually has the better roster? And suddenly, professional wrestling feels unpredictable again. Meanwhile, John Cena becomes the center of everything. But unlike real history, Cena's WCW run is very different. Because Nitro's audience rejects overproduced superheroes. So Cena adapts. He becomes sharper, more aggressive, more layered. The Doctor of Thugonomics evolves into a battle-tested locker room leader, constantly defending WCW from both Raw and internal challengers trying to replace him. His rivalries with AJ Styles, CM Punk, Samoa Joe, and Batista redefine his legacy. Instead of becoming a polarizing corporate mascot, Cena becomes wrestling's ultimate franchise champion. At the same time, Brock Lesnar dominates Raw as Vince McMahon's perfect creation, a terrifying, unstoppable athlete presented like the final boss of professional wrestling. For years, fans begged for one match, John Cena vs. Brock Lesnar. But both companies refused to give it away. The Cold War philosophy remains intact. Interpromotional matches are sacred, rare, protected, massive. And because of that restraint, every crossover feels historic. By 2007, WCW's Cruiserweight division evolves into something entirely new. No longer treated as smaller wrestlers, they become the blueprint for modern wrestling. AJ Styles, Rey Mysterio, CM Punk, Low-Ki, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels. And then comes the ultimate irony. The company that almost died ends up saving wrestling, without WCW surviving. There's no urgency, no innovation, no pressure to improve. But with competition alive, both brands are forced to adapt constantly. Production gets better, match quality rises, characters become deeper, the fans become more invested than ever. By the end of the decade, the wrestling industry looks completely different from the one fans remember. TNA never becomes a true national alternative because WCW already fills that role. Ring of Honor remains influential, but many of its future breakout stars are signed earlier by Nitro. The PG era never fully happens because Raw cannot afford to become too sanitized, while competing with WCW's edge. And perhaps most importantly, the word wrestling itself regains prestige, not sports entertainment, not nostalgia. Wrestling. Looking back years later, historians point to one moment that changed everything. Shane McMahon refusing to let WCW die. One decision, one risk, one surviving brand, and an entire industry rewritten forever.